Thank you, Briggs. Hello, everybody. Lovely to meet you all. Nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd. If we haven't met before, my name's Adam Kelly. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a white queer settler, born and raised on Treaty 1 territories. I'm an entrepreneur, a artist, a designer, a hobby tattooer. I kind of wear a lot of hats, and I'm grateful to kind of bring those hats into the work that I'm going to share with you today. I just want to also thank everyone in this conference for such beautiful land acknowledgements throughout this conversation every single time. Just very heartfelt and thoughtful, and I really, really appreciate it. It's a gift to be a guest on Treaty 6 lands today. One way that I really connect with the lands that I am from is through wandering around and looking at birds. I do a lot of birding, and it's been a delight as I've been walking around this city today and yesterday to see all the magpies flying around. To me, they're like really, they're the IKEA parking lot bird. And so it's really nice to see them kind of just everywhere here. Little mischievous guys. Another thing that I am is I am the co-founder and COO of the Social Entrepreneurship Enclave, also known as SEE. We are a queer and Indigenous founded and led nonprofit that supports marginalized and barrier-facing entrepreneurs across Manitoba. So a bit about kind of where we're coming from here. We were founded 6 years ago through a systemic study of the needs of Indigenous entrepreneurs in Manitoba. And through that, a bunch of needs were sort of identified. Obviously, there were probably 100 needs that were identified. But within that set of needs, there was a kind of kernel of something that could be sort of wraparound support and incubation from a community, harm reduction, and whole person perspective. And so that's something that we were starting to dream about, and then went to other communities, the queer community, Black community, other newcomer communities, and asked, would what we're talking about here be interesting to you? And what we heard from so many folks was a resounding yes, absolutely. And so that's kind of how we got started initially. Just generally speaking, our value that we try to always be optimizing for is, how can we put entrepreneurs first rather than, what is needed from the government who funds us, or how can we kind of sneak around and try to center the experiences of entrepreneurs. Very grateful for the folks like the CQCC who have been very flexible and curious about the ways in which the support that they've given us can be best applied to the benefit of entrepreneurs. I think they really set a great example for that for folks who fund work. So thank you, Janelle, and to everyone who's involved in putting this on. So here's some folks that I collaborate with, team members and co-founders. Something that's really interesting about our perspective, I think, is that because we are a queer and Indigenous founded organization, we kind of hold both of those perspectives at the same time and can see a lot of the similarities between communities, how founders from both communities see the world and orient themselves. I'm going to be talking in a lot of generalizations here. Obviously, I don't mean to say that all Indigenous or all queer entrepreneurs are like this or that, but I think that it is interesting to kind of share some of the common themes that we've seen throughout this. And one of those common themes is an interest in social impact, reciprocity, care for community, care for land. The social impact entrepreneurship space sometimes sort of silos itself off, and I find that there's a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily identify as social impact entrepreneurs in labeling themselves that, but because of who they are and how they see the world, they inherently operate in a social impact oriented way. And what we find with a lot of the folks that we support, because we particularly support folks doing sort of social impact work and innovation work and combining those two things, we see that they're often pretty frustrated by the tools that they are handed by traditional business support systems, the business world at large. These are not organizations, systems, tools that are really have space for their holistic worldview and care for the world around them that they would like to, embody as they are working in building their business, running their business. And so our job at SEE is to, again, ask, how can we center entrepreneurs here? What do they need? And we've developed tools to kind of fill in that gap of, seeing what is missing from what exists right now, and how can we create tools that help them stay in alignment with their values rather than assimilating to, or being kind of coerced and assimilated into more colonial ways of doing business, letting go of their values, pursuing debt that does not serve them, et cetera. So that's kind of framing this all up, and I'm going to share with you one of those tools today that we, it's in the title of this talk. It's not like it's a surprise to you. So yeah, I'm going to talk through, so some folks here are going to know what I mean when I talk about sort of the first third of my conversation about business plans and business model canvases. Both of these topics could be like an entire day thing, like there are, entire like courses in university on these things, and so I'm going to fly through it, and then we're all going to be like, great, we all know what we're talking about here, and so if you already know this, bear with me, and if you don't, please bear with the pace at which I will move through it, and we have tons of time for questions. I actually thought that, I was told that this was going to be a 15-minute talk, and that would be the time slot, and then I looked at the schedule 2 days ago and I was like, oh, they gave me an hour. Amazing. And so we will have lots of time for questions. Yeah, and so I will talk through business plans, business model canvas, and then share the Indigenous Social Enterprise Canvas, which was developed by my co-founder, Richard Tuck, and then offer some sort of closing thoughts. So for starters, as I'm sure we all are familiar with to some extent, so many founders, when they are starting out their businesses, particularly if it's their first time, business plan is going to be their first step. And to be frank, especially with the folks that we work with, this is where a lot of things start to go wrong pretty much immediately. The thing about a business plan is that if you're just going and being like, I'm building my business, I'm writing my business plan, when you're doing that, you're not actually really building your business. You're sitting down and writing a 40-page persuasive essay about why your assumptions about your business are correct. These are documents that are long, colonial, kind of focus on MBA language, and they're really created to benefit lenders, not entrepreneurs, right? So these are tools for de-risking loans that banks have kind of created as commonplace in order to access their capital. And so founders are put in a place where they are first led towards arguing for their own debt worthiness rather than being walked through the process of understanding what are your values, what is this thing you're building, especially if you're doing innovative work. There is probably not going to be a standard sort of template for what your business is. You need to go out and test and see if there's actually a fit for what you're proposing. And then, of course, when you finish this plan, it's 40 pages long, you're going to go into the world, you're going to learn things, and it really disincentivizes you going back and applying those learnings because that document is so long. You may have hired a consultant for $10,000 to write that business plan for you. I mean, it was $10,000 7 years ago. I don't know what it is now. But yeah, so there's a bunch of ways in which this is not optimized for having entrepreneurs stay in alignment with their values and is much more focused on benefiting banks. And so yeah, your plan on paper falls apart when you get into the real world. These neat documents fall apart in reality. One of the most important things I think to leave you with in this section is that, if you're an entrepreneur and you write a business plan and you hand it to a bank and they approve you for a loan, that is not the validation of your business idea. That is just, the fact that a bank saw you as low enough risk to give you a loan. The only way that you can validate your business idea is by doing the hard work and getting into the real world and saying, okay, what are our assumptions here? What are the relationships between the different components of this business? Do they work in concert with one another? Do they have the impact that we want to have? Can it create a sustainable model going forward? Instead, when we focus on business plans, it focuses on indebting entrepreneurs, which ultimately harms them if they are not doing the work to test their model ahead of time. So what happens is you take your business plan, you go to the bank, they give you a loan. Let's just kind of take that for granted. If you are doing something novel and you did not test your idea ahead of time, and I'm saying this because I see the founders that we work with are put down this path all the time. You have been given $70,000 by a futurepreneur of unsecured debt that goes on your personal credit. You are encouraged to go and spend that money on renovations for your donut shop or a truck for your business, and then you launch your business and there is not a fit with the market. There is a harsh reality there that you did not do the testing and you were wrong about some things, which is super common, And so what happens is that this business is not viable, and that thing that this business that you proposed that was the basis of you receiving this loan is not something that you can use to make that money back. Those interest payments pile up. You can't afford groceries. You cannot care for your family. And particularly for community-minded entrepreneurs from marginalized backgrounds, this doesn't just affect them as people. This affects their families. This affects their communities. This is a real human stake, a real human story that we see every single day. And I just really wish that people were more aware of this and more pissed off about it, to be honest, because business plans and loans are important in certain contexts, but because that is the primary pipeline through which a lot of entrepreneurial support programming pushes people through, there's a lot of earlier steps that needed to happen in order for that to be helpful. And by hopping to that stage, entrepreneurs end up being harmed. So, of course, the folks who do fairly fine in this situation are the folks with more privilege, the folks with a buddy who's a lawyer, a friend who's an accountant, who have access to family capital, who understand the game, understand the systems that they're working in. And for marginalized founders, less privileged founders, those bumps, those shocks of hitting the market, they sink them. They cannot adapt to it in the same way that people with more resources are able to. And so, that is 4 minutes on how, the business plan kind of system pushes entrepreneurs towards debt in a way that harms them. Now, at C, like I said before, business plans are still important, but we want to use them when appropriate. We want to recognize that, all businesses need to go and be tested in the real world. You need to go and create hypotheses, do a little scientific method moment where you're seeing, is this viable? Is this actually, are you seeing that there are people out there that want this? Is this the right location for you to open your business? All these questions that you really need to go and do the hard research work of doing. Now, a lot of organizations aren't led by entrepreneurs or have entrepreneurs in their team. These are hard skills to teach necessarily unless you have an MBA or done a bunch of study or yourself have kind of gone through some of these processes. And so I understand why some organizations are more focused on business plans because they're a little bit cleaner, right? Going out into the real world and testing your ideas is challenging and messy. At C, we are an entirely entrepreneur-run organization. My co-founders and I are all entrepreneurs. Everyone we hire is an entrepreneur themselves. And so we really believe in supporting folks as people with lived experience because we recognize the inherent risks as well as carry some tools forward to know when we know how to support someone and also when we don't know how to support someone. My main job is just to say, hey, I have no idea how to solve this problem. Let's figure out who can help you with this. So yeah, in entrepreneurship, we need to recognize obviously that there is always inherent risk. But that leads us to a question that I only just articulated to my co-founder Richard the other day while I was putting together this talk. But I realized lends language to how we approach everything we've done for the last 5 years pretty succinctly, which is, how do we apply concepts of harm reduction to the inherent risks of entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship is inherently risky, like any high-risk activity, so much harm reduction discourses in the drug use space. And, of course, the folks who have more privilege, have more systemic support, can go do coke on the weekends and they're fine. You know what I mean? But folks who are struggling with houselessness, struggling with mental health, these are the folks who are going to end up having a more problematic relationship with substances. And so in the case of entrepreneurship, how can we make it so that you should absolutely pursue this, but we should be realistic about the challenges and the risks of it. And so how can we make those learnings smaller, make it so that you don't get sunk by this big experiment you're doing? How can we right size the questions you're asking and the experiments that you're doing for the stage of your business and your resources? And how can we support you in doing that? So when it comes to the issues of the business plan, Silicon Valley has known about it for a long time. They pivoted and created something called the business model canvas. This takes us from a 40-page persuasive essay to a back-of-the-napkin 9-sector hypothesis map where we can sketch out, the 9 key components of knowing what your business model roughly is going to be, test those relationships, sketch, test, iterate what you're doing. This is faster, this is much cheaper than writing a 40-page persuasive essay, and makes a huge improvement for a lot of people on business plans. What it does not do, however, is it is really only focused on a limited idea of what business can be. It is focused on profit. It is focused on efficiency. It is not holistically considering what else a business may be. I'm just going to kind of leave that as a sort of extended ... here. So business model canvas, much better, but still assimilates people towards an idea of sort of profit maxing, if I were to use language my 25-year-old brother would understand. So that leads us to the Indigenous Social Enterprise Canvas. This was developed by Richard Tuck. He's gay, métis, serial entrepreneur, visionary in the social impact, investment, and Indigenous entrepreneurship space. He plucked me out of university a number of years ago, and I'm very grateful to have been working in deep collaboration with him ever since. He developed this tool in relationship with Indigenous founders, many of whom we work with to this day. And yeah, just like all respect to Richard, I'm very much an ambassador of this. This is not something that I personally developed, but we use it every day in our work with entrepreneurs. So, for starters, what's the same as the business model canvas? We're leaving a lot of what works and a lot of what applies to more standard businesses, right? So you got your revenues, expenses, customers, partners, value proposition, resources, activities, expenses, right? Like kind of just like standard, these are components that you're gonna talk about in a lot of your standard business plans. But you can see there are a lot of blank spaces here, and so I'm gonna fill you in on those next. So, you know, I covered those components that are borrowed from the business model canvas, but those are not what we start with. What we start with are these two top and two bottom components. Simon Sinek, start with why. That's been around for 10 years. We try to implement that here because it is really important, particularly for mission and impact-driven founders, right? We want to help people get really clear on like, what is the future you are trying to create in your business? It is not just going to be profit for most of the folks that we're working with. You're looking for community benefit, cultural preservation, environmental impact. And so we want to get really clear about that really early, right? And the business model canvas just actually doesn't really have very much space for that. And then, at the same time, reconciliation factors being considered from the very beginning as well, because these things, frankly, just need to not be an afterthought anymore. And then key metrics at the bottom as well is, you know, how are you going to know that you are having the impact that you desire to have? And so getting clear on how you would be measuring that, so you can, as you are testing, know whether or not this is actually doing what you want it to do. And so this is a tool, like, you know, helps folks to grow, to build businesses, right? And to test their assumptions in the real world, but to stay aligned with their values that's bringing them to entrepreneurships in the first place while doing so. So next, yes, just a brief, you know, note about reconciliation factors. You know, this is going to look very different depending on who you are. For non-Indigenous firms, you know, this is going to look like a number of things. This could literally be like an infinite number of things, but I'm just going to give some quick examples here. You know, having genuine ongoing relationships with local nations. You know, how is reconciliation worked into your hiring, procurement, and allocation of your surplus, your profits? What are you doing with them to support reconciliation? And how can you make public commitments to reconciliation that you are held accountable to? For Indigenous firms, you know, how can community lead your organization? How can it lead your decision making? Again, how can surplus be returned to community? And how can you incorporate cultural protocols and treaty practices into your day-to-day operations? Another important shift that we make in this tool is getting away from just thinking about customers. For a lot of social impact businesses, who pays is not the same as who benefits. So I use the example here of Sean Rayland, Red Rebel Armor. He's the guy in the gray hoodie in the very back. He's lurking back there. But he's an amazing First Nations entrepreneur who we've worked with for quite a while. And his business is a great way to illustrate this. So when I buy a hoodie from Sean, I am just the paying customer. I am not the beneficiary. The beneficiaries are the Indigenous youth artists who he hires to create the designs that go onto the streetwear that he creates, or that they create. And the beneficiaries are also the formerly incarcerated individuals who he hires and trains in printing of garments and designs to create an on-ramp of transition after folks are coming out of incarceration and kind of getting back onto sort of a working and career path. So, you know, in order for Sean to do a very good good job in running his business, he needs to be very thoughtful about, you know, what does his customers want? Like, what does me, Adam, who just wants a nice hoodie with Louis Riel on it, and what do the folks who he's in relationship with through, like, employment and otherwise being in relationship in support of creation of the designs, what do they need as well, right? And so if he over-optimizes for either one of them, you know, the model will not work very well. And so it's important to separate those out and help founders think about those as separate groups. It also opens up the possibility of blended revenue models between, say, subsidies, grants, and earned revenue, right? And so, yeah, that's why we separate that out here. Yeah, and overall, there's a few things that I would like generally sort of categorize as a harm reduction lens here, where this tool allows for a small experimental approach where we're breaking up the business idea into different hypotheses that you can actually go and test. But beyond that, we try to name resistances early and be honest about them, particularly for barrier-facing entrepreneurs, queer folks, Indigenous folks, otherwise marginalized entrepreneurs. There are going to be a lot of headwinds that you are facing due to the nature of the society that we are living in, and systemic racism, colonization, homophobia, all of the things that we have been talking and speaking in opposition to for the last day. And it can create a very strange cognitive dissonance, almost like gaslighty experience when you're trying to start your business and then you're just facing all of this homophobia, for example, while you're doing that. We really believe in just mentioning that here as well. What are the headwinds that you're going to be facing, both from a business perspective and also perhaps because of who you are and what the future you're trying to create in the world. We also map unintended consequences. These are not things you're going to necessarily know about at the beginning when you sit down to first fill out your Indigenous social enterprise canvas. But we leave these fields in here so that as you are testing your idea, as you are modeling it out in the real world, you can add them in. Of course, positive unintended consequences, wonderful. How can you leverage that for your storytelling, perhaps amplify it to increase your social impact or create surprising social impacts? And then also, how can you be very realistic about the negative unintended consequences that your business is having? This is not something that most business tools really account for, and I think that an amazing way to make sure that your unintended consequences are going to be mostly negative is by ignoring the fact that they're going to happen in the first place. And so an example of that is Tom's. Who remembers Tom's shoes? Show of hands. Yeah, okay, everyone here owned a pair of Tom's at some point. Yeah, so Tom's, social enterprise. They sell shoes. They take Argentine styles and then kind of sell them in America to have people feel like they're doing a good thing. They donate a pair of shoes to I don't know actually where exactly they were doing this, presumably Africa, donating shoes to someone in need. Good idea. However, in order to do this at scale, they basically organized it so that when they were donating those secondary pairs of shoes that were the give-a-pair set of shoes, they were trying to do it at scale, and so it could only do it at a minimum size of 10,000 shoes at a time. And so they would go into these small communities and just provide 10,000 pairs of shoes. These were not very good quality shoes. They're not the same shoes that you were getting here. And what this would do is it would put local shoe sellers out of business. And so suddenly, you have all this influx of shoes. Shoe sellers go out of business. The shoes break and break down, and there is no longer a shoe store in your community, and you have to travel to go get your shoes. That sucks. However, in addition to that, it also disincentivizes someone to come and solve that problem in the future. Because if you now are oh man, we had all those crappy shoes from Tom's and now they're gone and now everyone has to go to the next community over to get shoes, you don't want to solve that problem because you know that Tom's could come in and ruin your business all over again, right? And so it creates a number of unintended consequences that are just fundamentally negative for the folks in these communities. So whatever, shout out to well-intentioned white people throwing shoes at people on the other side of the world, but yeah, I can just see a lot of shaking heads here. It's absolutely bananas, right? And so we want to make it so that when you're testing your business out from the very beginning, we're being conscious and thoughtful about that, and not looking like that guy. So a few other sort of reframing components in this tool, relationships are sort of considered throughout through reconciliation factors, partners, beneficiaries, et cetera, not just as it's here's your relationships, I want to imagine relationships as a branching out of relations in all directions rather than being you are my customer and you're the only one who matters. As I mentioned before, we're reframing profit as surplus, as something that can be redistributed, and again, not profit maxed, I don't know. And then, yeah, just affirming generally relational ways of being through business. And helping entrepreneurs stay in alignment with the values that really brought them to doing this hard thing that is entrepreneurship in the first place. So yeah, overall, that alignment is, we try to do that through, holding real complexity in this tool, centering care and reciprocity, and Yeah, I mean, this was designed not because like Richard was sitting in his house one day being like, man, this would be a great idea. It was developed as like in dialogue with entrepreneurs and seeing like as he was working with social impact, particularly Indigenous entrepreneurs, seeing the ways in which they were being failed over and over and over again. And bit by bit, again, iterative testing, you know, here, add this, how can we kind of, it comes into a whole and now we go and use it with entrepreneurs and see if it's actually compelling. And it is. So yeah. The thing that also is really exciting and interesting about this is that, like, again, tying this back to sort of like the queer focus of this conference at large, I think as like, I'm not going to speak for everybody here, but I think that like some folks, and I have definitely like felt this way in the past, where you know, there's an idea of there's like the Indigenous tool, and then there is the tool for me that who's not an Indigenous person. There's kind of like when people think, in the same way that like when someone's like, this is social impact, it's like, okay, this is like now in the social impact corner. I think a similar thing kind of happens with things that have the word Indigenous on them. If you yourself are not Indigenous, that may come from a nice place of like not wanting to appropriate. However, things like reconciliation and accountability to Indigenous communities needs to just be something that we're all considering on an ongoing basis through all of this work that we're doing. So like that is a foundational value. And what I'm so encouraged by and delighted by, to be honest, is that when I'm working with the many queer founders that we work with, but half of our participants in our programs are queer. Actually, if you count both of our programs, it's probably more like 60 or 70%. Even non-Indigenous entrepreneurs are really interested in this idea. I have a lot of non-Indigenous queer entrepreneurs asking me all the time, is like, how do I incorporate, you know, reconciliation and decolonization into my business and the way that I operate? And this is a great place to start that we direct folks to. It really just works for anybody who is focused on impact, responsibility, care, relationships. And yes, in addition to that, of course, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 92 calls for more equitable participation and inclusion in the business world for Indigenous folks and for non-Indigenous organizations to meaningfully, you know, collaborate with and interact and provide resources to Indigenous folks in, you know, the sector broadly. This also includes education, I believe. And this is a way to practice that as a fundamental design process, basically. So yeah, if you are interested in this, here are some recommendations. I think that generally, I've actually been really grateful to like put this presentation together because it's given me time to like sort of really think about like, you know, what are the stories and biases and worldviews that the tools that we are using are reinforcing, right? When you're, you know, whatever, we talked about the business plan, we talked about a business model canvas, but more broadly, like what are you doing? You might not be working directly with entrepreneurs, but when it comes to whatever you are doing, you know, what are those tools reinforcing? What are they, you know, very, very subtly, what worldview are they extending into the world? And if you find you are not super stoked on what you ultimately know in your gut when you think about that, how can you change to use tools that are more in alignment with reconciliation, re-indigenization, queer inclusion, you know, just generally making the world a more beautiful and inclusive place overall. I would also suggest focusing on funding learning rather than documents, not jumping straight into, you know, having someone writing a business plan, but also like building into your programming like that testing process. I know that not everybody has like, you know, the experience or skill set to do that all of the time, but it's really, really important to make sure that once people do write that business plan, it is not like horribly misaligned with reality, and you're not pushing this entrepreneur into, you know, a debt cycle that will ultimately harm them if it's something that they need to test in the real world. You know, this tool, I saw you all pulling up your phones. Great, please use this tool. We are not here to like be like, this is our intellectual property and give us money now. Like, we would really love to see this implemented very widely. And yeah, of course, reconciliation and impact are for everyone, even folks who don't necessarily identify as like that being their primary reason for getting into the work that they're doing. As a final thought, I would just leave you with, you know, entrepreneurship does not have to be an act of assimilation, an act of compliance. It can instead be an act of care, an act of creativity, an act of, you know, genuine and caring relationship for all the relations that you find yourself, you know, surrounded by. Yeah, that's the end of my talk. I believe this is the question period. Nice. Yes? Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm trying really hard to choose my words. From an ignorant perspective, I deal a lot with entrepreneurs and the banks, financial institutions.
Yep.
So is the idea that you talked earlier about kind of the colonial traditional model of setting up a business plan and then submitting it to, let's say, a bank for funding.
Yep.
Is the idea that the ISEC is now the activity that happens before you go for the business plan, or is it designed to now replace the business plan and the lean canvas?
Totally.
Answer.
Sorry, I kind of interrupted you. That's the end of your question?
Yes, but depending on the answer, I'll have a follow-up.
Okay,
So-
great, perfect. So the answer is yes, it is a tool to use before writing a business plan. Again, like getting that loan capital is still something that is really important for a lot of entrepreneurs to scale. But we want to make sure that people are being led through a process of like co-design and thoughtful testing of the viability of the business in the first place before they go and write the business plan, right? So, and doing that with a tool that encourages quick iteration, changing when you learn things, so that you can implement the learning that you're having quickly. When you jump to like that 40-page business plan, you can go out and test your idea, but it's like, are you going to now just go and rewrite the whole business plan, or even the like 2-page section that pertains to what you are learning within? What I do, I'm very grateful that like AI came out with exactly when it did, in like the way that it is now, because, and I really enjoyed the panel just before this. It came out right after I finished university. I did not have it for university, but it came out as we were getting funding to operationalize all the work that we do, and so it's been such a force multiplier in supporting the entrepreneurs that we do. So that's an unnecessary preamble. What I will do, once we've really mapped out what an entrepreneur's business is, I will sit down with them, and usually I will put this canvas, with their consent, of course, because that needs to be just always happening, putting their canvas into, say, like, whatever your favorite large language model is, and then getting it to generate for me a series of questions that would pertain to, okay, so like write me a bunch of questions that would go through every component of a business plan for this business, and specifically focus on topics that a bank would be interested in me really touching on in a business plan. So then I get like 40 questions. Like it's really long, and it goes section by section. I sit down with the entrepreneur, my friend and participant Alex, who was there's a picture of him in the first slide here, and we will sit for 2.5 hours and talk through every single question, because I don't know everything about the business, and it's not necessarily my job to know every single thing about the business. And we will start a Zoom call and transcribe it, and then we will talk through the whole business and basically have that as a giant source document for everything about the business, which he now knows because he's gone and tested it, in the real world. There's a sense of that this is probably viable, and then we will basically use the canvas as well as that transcribed document to write an entire business plan very quickly. Instead of having to hire a consultant to write it for however much money, it can be much more like democratized. And someone like me, who's not like a professional business plan writer, can support that process. But again, like once it's done, once you have that document, you still need someone who like really knows their shit to go and like look it over, right? Like again, the loop still needs to involve people with expertise, but it can involve less people spending less time on it, and a lot of that hard work, especially like that like translating of their idea into like that very colonial MBA language, that's being offloaded to AI. So that answers your question and also like, elaborates. I would love if you had a follow-up.
Yes, just a follow-up to that is, have you had any work working with institutions on trying to get them to adopt this model as a application to a business plan? So somebody says, okay, I want a $50,000 loan from a bank. But then the bank says, okay, adopt the ISEC and show us proof of concept on the ISEC. Here's $5,000. Go get started. And then once you've kind of used this model and proven it, come back and we'll give you the other $45,000. Like, have you thought about that? If you haven't,
I love where you're going with this.
I'd love to have a conversation with you. I took your information. I'll reach out for the deck and
Totally.
I don't
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
take up.
That would be a great improvement. No, basically. I think some folks in banks, again, banks don't understand entrepreneurship necessarily, right? Like they understand reading business plans and assessing risk, which like those are obviously like if that's a Venn diagram, there's overlap there, but there are two different skill sets on either side there, right? And so there are some people that I know, like there's someone, Noah Wilson at Futurepreneur, wonderful like Indigenous advocate and connector in, all over, Manitoba. He understands this, but he is a small cog in a very big machine. He is doing great work to apply stuff like this, but that is really like on an individual level, unfortunately. What I'm more concerned with is the nonprofits that do like support like barrier-facing entrepreneurs who are operating with an incredibly outdated paradigm of how to support entrepreneurs, which is really just like there's a organization in Winnipeg that like really it focuses on low-income entrepreneurs, and they just kind of bring you in and then help you like write a business plan, doing a little bit of testing, but really not as much as they should. Nothing like this, and again, those are like, particularly from a class perspective, folks who are like extremely marginalized, and their time is being wasted, to be completely honest, like by going straight towards a business plan. And yeah, we just really believe in not wasting entrepreneurs' time, and that happens way too much in a lot of spaces, unfortunately. Yeah, but yeah, we'd love to talk more, after this. Yeah.
Hi. I'm going to ask a follow-up on my neighbor's question.
Perfect.
I'm wondering, so when you translate this to like a bank business plan,
Yeah.
what happens to the things like that are kind of added here, like the mission, the reconciliation factors? Like, do you still incorporate those? Because that seems to me like the key or like the core, right?
Yeah.
So, but like, of course, the bank like wants to know about the risk and all that. So does this stay?
Yeah.
Like, how does it stay or not?
Totally. I would say that in the case of going, from this to getting a loan, right? Getting that capital is really the goal. We will encourage whatever makes it most likely that you are going to get that loan. So if it is an organization that is invested in working, reconciliation factors into like their assessment of like who they want to loan money to, absolutely. But we are not inherently adding all of these components in here. The reason that these components are in here, these additional pieces, mission impact, reconciliation factors, metrics, is because we want to make sure that as they are conceptualizing the business and testing it, that these are things that are like in alignment with every other piece of the business, right? That business plan is not going to be their guiding document going forward. It is a means to an end of getting that loan. This would be a living document that they can keep on hand going forward. And as they learn, as they pivot, as they change the business, always returning and changing it. And like whatever, like they don't have to use this just because we like it, right? Like, but if it is valuable, it empowers that sort of like alignment. You can think of it, once you get that loan, this is an intention document. If that's like a helpful sort of alternative lens to put on it.
I think it's a follow-up of the follow-up. And I'm not an entrepreneur, so this might be a silly question. But for somebody who maybe already has access to capital or access to a loan through the traditional business plan, and they want to look at the ISEC instead and kind of bring that into how they're operating now, maybe they didn't consider the reconciliation factors or the unintended consequences like you saw with Tom's, how might you suggest they incorporate these extra categories, and maybe do they just do this again with what already exists and then the stuff that they hadn't considered before, or would you start net new?
Interesting. I wonder if that is the job for a like Indigenous reconciliation consultant and not a job for us in this. I would hesitate to say that this is for anything other than what we have made it for. That being said, and that like really being like, that is the main point of what I would like to say in response to that. The small subheading there is that like, yeah, sure, they could write through, what are the components of their business and then consider, what are their unintended consequences, what are their intended consequences, positive, negative. They totally could. I don't know if this is the most efficient way for them to spend their time on that, assuming that they're busy as hell, like all entrepreneurs are. Yeah, that's my like actual answer and then my secret little additional answer. Again, expected to have 15 minutes. And so we are going to end early. So if we are out of questions, that is totally fine. But I will answer, I will yap for as long as you let me.
I'll keep going. I mean,
Hell yeah.
it's I did not expect this coming here, so it's very riveting. Case studies. Do you have any case studies that you could go through on entrepreneurs that you guys have supported that have kind of gone through the ISEC?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned before, let's see. I'll just go back to the very beginning because there's a picture of them. Alex Kohut, participant in C, also board member of the Manitoba Queer Chamber. The ED, Jenny, is here as well. Hello, fellow Manitobans up in Edmonton. Yeah, so Alex, I've known Alex for a very long time. Alex was in our first cohort at the end of 2023 of like our sort of current rendition of programming. And yeah, basically, you know, they have been, they are a microgreens business, and they basically just like started growing microgreens. They developed a relationship with this plant wall creator, this local business in Winnipeg who's like scaled all over the globe. I believe they're called Harvest Today is the plant wall creator people. And they basically are like, we want like kind of a case study entrepreneur who like sells microgreens locally, who we can kind of use as our flagship like face of this. And so they got a bunch of resources and support from Harvest Today. And so they have been like slowly building up their capacity, and as we have been doing that, we have worked through, you know, all of these considerations in their business to help them sort of like, just again, they're just running, they're going to small local farmers markets and selling, they're going and figuring out like, do they have a subscription service, like do they do delivery, all of these things, and you know, just noting that as they go. And like this is that kind of like real world testing. You're not like writing a business plan, getting $70,000, blowing it on something you don't need, and then getting super into debt. It's just like scaling with what you have. And frankly, this is like a necessity of the fact that like yeah, people do not necessarily have the resources to just go and like, you know, blow all that money or get that loan in the first place. Alex was like dropped out of high school, like is not, and is neurodivergent and is like not sitting down here and like writing long documents day to day, you know? And so we've been supporting them in putting together, you know, an understanding of the business. And then about, this would have been earlier this summer, Alex was like, great, we're gonna upsize into a new facility. We need a loan in order to do that. And so I was like, great, you're gonna come over to our office, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna talk through the whole business plan, basically. And that process of like getting that, you know, having the model through the Indigenous Social Enterprise Canvas, and then also like transcribing a discussion of the business, and then using that, putting that into AI and getting it to write the whole business plan, and getting it to then say, here's what I don't know, here's the assumptions I'm making, here's where you need someone to do like proper financial analysis because we didn't have that data on hand. We end up in that part of the process, basically. And so, yeah, I don't know if Alex has like proceeded in actually like getting the loan at this point. I know it was like right on the edge of it, basically. But yeah, like that is like a case study that I could share.
Hi, back again. I'm wondering, because you mentioned that like you had 60% of your clients being Indigenous or queer, I don't remember. Do you get a lot of people that are queer Indigenous as well? Because you kind of talked about how you sort of like two clienteles, I guess.
Yes, is like, you know, yes, I guess. I mean, like Alex is an example. Alex is Métis and Filipino and also queer. Janelle, our auntie in residence, actually, the middle bottom photo, instead of an entrepreneur in residence, because our whole team is entrepreneurs, we have an auntie in residence who's someone who's there as a like two-spirit Michif woman who can share the lived experience of someone like, Janelle is also a badass entrepreneur, to be completely transparent about that, but they can lend the perspective to the folks that we're working with of just like someone who's like dealt with these barriers before and can kind of provide culturally affirming support, and just like someone like me who looks like me and is like a, you know, a white queer settler should not be advising people on this kind of thing, you know, like, and so we want to make sure that we have that support as well. And so yeah, there, you know, in any case where you're like, you know, you have like niche number one, niche number two, and then like niche squared of like the overlap of those two niches, obviously there's going to be like less folks, but there are like a number of folks who, and particularly in Manitoba, because I believe that Winnipeg is the only city in Canada that has a higher Indigenous population per capita than Edmonton. Jenny is subtly nodding. I'm fairly certain that is true. And like the Two-Spirit, one of the founders of like the Two-Spirit movement, who like spoke at Jenny's amazing kickoff event a few months ago, there's like a lot of indigiqueer knowledge and culture being preserved and explored and expressed in Manitoba. And so I'm very grateful to be working with folks who carry those identities. Yeah, I got to keep the question chain going, guys. Come on.
You said keep going, so. As supporting entrepreneurs that are traditionally underrepresented, have you ever had a situation where you have an entrepreneur who meets ISEC, who meets the traditional risk factors for the bank, but then there are other factors that don't agree with the bank, such as, for example, credit? So we support Black entrepreneurs, and we see it all the time, where they don't necessarily are
Can I ask what
creditworthy.
organization you work at?
I'm with a Dream Legacy Foundation.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, so for example, credit worthiness.
Yep.
Is there anything that the ISEC model can do to now, because it goes above and beyond,
Yeah.
to now support those entrepreneurs? Or have you worked with institutions that have said, okay, yes, we have your business plan, and because you've also presented maybe the ISEC model in addition to the business plan, that has now kind of been the extra little bit to now get the file over the line? Like, let's say with a futurepreneur.
Just to be completely clear, like, they're not necessarily presenting the Indigenous model canvas like when they're going for that loan. Like, the bank doesn't care. They don't know what it is. That's a really interesting question. I have not personally dealt with that yet. I'm sure I will, but yeah, I don't want to say anything that's not completely true, so I will not project or assume. But yeah, I appreciate the question, and I can, when I'm not on a mic talking to many people, I will totally kind of dive into maybe what I would consider doing. But I don't, it's not something I specifically work on, so I don't want to share anything that's not true. Absolutely. I'm here all week.
Adam, thank you so much for your time and your presentation. This was absolutely so eye-opening and incredible. Folks, can we show our appreciation to our hosts, and just thank you so much.
Thank you all for your amazing questions and curiosity. I really appreciate you're at the end of a long day. The fact that there's anyone, I was kind of expecting actually less people than this to be here. So yeah, thank you for being here. It's lovely to share this with you today.